Kuznetsov, Kamov, and Skrzynski. The theoretical calculations team was headed by Mikhail Mil. Starting from 1931, this design bureau produced a number of autogyros. The most renowned was A7, a gigantic dragonfly. It's an autogyro. It can take off and land without taking a run. It can easily land on a flat roof of a building. The autogyro is piloted by Comrade Koshets. Machine had its practical application. In the beginning of 1941, thousands of hectares of the Tianshine Gardens were invaded by pests. Agricultural airplanes could not be used due to narrow valley gorges, while autogyro did not require any takeoff and landing strips. A7 easily maneuvered in the gorges, going down into the valleys, turning round and climbing up again to reach areas unreachable for airplanes. Tests and operations of autogyros helped designers of the rotary wing machine to master specifics of the flight aerodynamics and to learn how to calculate durability. Autogyro played the same role in the life of helicopter as the glider in the history of airplane. But let's get back to the beginning of the 30s. In spite of the autogyrotopic perspective, helicopter development never stopped. As far back as in 1926, a helicopter group was formed in Tsagi headed by Alexei Cheremukhin. After fundamental analysis, the group started to develop the first Soviet helicopter Tsagi-1EA, which stood for Experimental Machine. It was based on the single-rotor layout. The rotor torque reaction was cancelled by 4 tail rotors placed in pairs in front and rear. The prototype took off in September 1930. The designer himself was the test pilot. On August 14, 1932, Cheremukhin lifted his helicopter to 605 meters, exceeding the official altitude world record by more than 33 times. It was an outstanding success. Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who was then responsible for the rearmament of the Red Army, was fascinated. Being a supporter of novelties in the army, he suggested to put Tsagi-1 into production. However, the layout reliability and flight duration required long improvement. While it was being performed, Alexei Cheremukhin was announced enemy of the nation, dismissed from his work, and in 1938 got under repressions. In 1933, all design works in Tsagi on the helicopter topic were headed by young engineer Ivan Baratuhin. The Tsagi-5 helicopter was made under his supervision. It differed from its predecessors by the rotor design. Next machine was Tsagi-11, built in 1936. It was combined layout. Besides the rotor, it had an airplane wing at the end of which there were propellers. This machine was supposed to take off as a helicopter and then fly as an airplane. Such layout was defined as rotor wing. Tests of this machine were not completed. Development of the rotor wing machines of various layouts went on all over the world. The aviation science and technology progress was adequate for the development of a worthy helicopter. The first helicopters with applicable flight characteristics were the French Breguet d'Oran, and the German Focke-Wulf 61. The latter was especially fascinating. Built under the guidance of Heinrich Focke, it turned out capable of performing long-range flights. The side-by-side layout provided it with enough stability and controllability. Abilities of this machine were demonstrated by the famous German woman pilot Hanna Reitsch. The flights were even more fascinating since they were performed inside the indoor Deutschlandhalle Stadium. The German military command got so much fascinated that it ordered a 6-seat version of this machine. The multi-purpose Focke Achgelis 223 was put into production in the middle of the war. At the same time, Germany started to issue a light Flettner 282 helicopter. It had a layout of a syncropter. Those were real achievements of the German helicopter development. However, those machines never had any mass presence at the fronts of the Second World War. The factories did not manage to perform their production due to Anglo-American bombings. The Russian immigrant aircraft designer Igor Sikorsky gained huge success in the USA in the sphere of the rotor wing machines production. Later, he was honorably called the father of the world helicopter development. His prototype VS-300 was a single rotor layout based with the tail rotor. By 1941, Sikorsky made it operational. The single rotor layout became classical. Over 90% of all helicopters were built upon such a layout. The two-seat S-47 Sikorsky helicopters entered service in the US and the British armies already in the course of the war. From March 1944, they were utilized for withdrawing the wounded, performing communication, surveillance, units and vessels supply matter. After the end of the war, there appeared a paradox. Helicopters seemed to prove their right for existence. However, orders for their production were significantly cut. The U.S. Army and Navy Command doubted whether it was expedient to invest scanty after-war funds into the rotor wing aviation. Indeed, characteristics of the first helicopters, especially their payload and speed, were poor in comparison with those of airplanes. No orders came from the businesses either. They did not hurry to pay for the unusual aircraft, which was more expensive, difficult in maintenance, and not much reliable. Helicopters' appearance at the fronts of the Second World War did not stay unnoticed in the USSR. Funds were allocated to Ivan Bratuhin's Design Bureau. This design bureau was established before the war in January 1940 and already then managed to build a helicopter called Omega. It was based on the side-by-side layout, the same as of the German Focke-Wulf 61. However, problems discovered at tests were not resolved as successfully as the Germans did. Omega took off in August 1941. Thereafter, the Bratuhin's team was evacuated, then returned back. Then there were problems with the engines. So the designer began to deal with helicopters only by the end of the war. In 1944, Omega 2 took off. In 1945, there came the upgraded G3 artillery spotter version, which turned to be rather successful.